solving technical problems. And I don't need to expand on this because it will be very clear from the 2 days that we've been observing that the people here don't believe in this. And you are right. Because we are very much involved in establishing socio-technical systems. And this is not solving problems. We are creating right now many more problems than we are solving, as a matter of fact. At least are 2 very critical fronts. Digital technologies are destroying the demos. And without demos, you cannot have democracy. And digital technologies are destroying the mental health of our children. The depriving of their childhood. This is very serious. This is not something minor. And this is not done by the bad capitalists who tell the coders and the system scientists what to do. They are doing it themselves. And this is the anthropology that Helga was talking about, and unfortunately she's not here. She's very right. You have to understand why these people, the system arguments and the coders, are doing so much harm without being told to do so. So, this is where we come from. Because we have the duty to intervene exactly at this layer of anthropology, which cannot be reached from outside, and to change the economy. And we can do it through 3 means. One is through the education system. Before they get there, it will take time, and we are doing this. We are working together with It's okay. I don't have a problem with this. So we are working together with very renowned educational centers and universities to develop curricula to do exactly what you're saying. How to embed ethical values and the considerations into engineering schools. And we started 1 year ago to do this. We're co-financing it. We also delivering material and so on. So this is very important. Engaging with the academical thinkers to do exactly what you're saying. We're doing this. The second is the part of it is to change the narrative about ourselves. What I said at the beginning, the assumption that we're just technical. We have no responsibility of what happens with what we are doing. We have to change this narrative. And the goal is that we assume the part of the responsibility that belongs to us. No more, no less than this. I usually finish my speeches by saying the time of innocence is over. And it should be over. And now the question is, once this narrative is advanced, once people start to understand, really, I have to do a better job when designing such systems. So how? The question is, how do you do this? What does it mean transparency in terms of system design? What does it mean accountability of organizations and systems when you design an organization? What does it mean reduction of bias when you design algorithmic decision-making systems? What does it mean respect of our privacy in order to save the demos, the democracy, when you design systems? It is good to say, okay, we don't want to interfere with human rights, but what does it mean at the level of design? And this is where we come in. And believe me, that we have gone very far there. We're not talking about this. We have established tools and systems to precisely help the system designers and coders to do exactly this. And these are certification schemes, which we applied here precisely in the city of Vienna. And Dietmar is going to tell us how he experienced this and how we work together to make this happen here in Vienna. That the city of Vienna can say to the citizens, listen, we don't only talk about digital humanism, but we do it. And this is how we do it. Secondly, we have been developing standards, and our standards are not norms. They are not come from above. They are instructions from us to ourselves, how to do a better design job from the beginning. And our flagship standard, which is a model system of how to embed ethical values, human values, within larger ICT platforms. This was initiated here in Vienna again, by people here in Vienna who had thought about this, wrote and so on. We recognized the potential and we convinced them to spend thousands of hours unpaid of their life to develop this standard over 5 years. Again, Vienna was really the center of this. So there is something. This is why I'm here today. There is something here in Vienna and in Austria. I don't know exactly what, but there is a hub of people here who understand this and try to make this happen. And this is why we're allied. So this is the second part. That means how to do it. Once you understand you have a responsibility and you assume it, then what are the tools? And the tools are best developed by ourselves. And the third is we cannot solve it alone. We must be part of something bigger. We have to interact with other groups and with other disciplines. And it is not here not only about interdisciplinarity. It is not about us interacting with philosophers, sociologists. This happens already in the projects we are doing, because these projects are not technical, are socio-technical already. But we engage very, very strongly with policymakers and other organizations, because, and we have some fantastic examples, what may happen if we work together. Because, for instance, when the legislators legislate about how to defend the rights of children online, they need us. Because the big platforms come and tell them to the legislators, what are you talking about? You have no idea what you're talking about. This is technically not feasible. And we have 4,000 scientists who can tell you, you are nuts. And then they come to us and say, help us. You're independent and expert. Are we really nuts? Or they're just defending their business interests? And this is where it starts to get very interesting. And if we work together with the legislators and regulators who want really to do something, then we can achieve it. We can win. And we are winning. So these are the 3 levels: narrative, how to do once you are convinced you have to do something, and then how to work with others, because we cannot do it alone. We have to work with others to do it. And these are 3 things that an organization like ours, and we're quite unique, but we're not the only one. And this is a paradox. There are also other engineering associations and so on. But IEEE is still quite a unique animal, because we are the consciousness of, let's say, the electrification as a means of industrialization. We are the charge or the mecca for the most of this technoscientific world. We have a huge influence. And if we change, let's say, the core of the beliefs and also the way we act upon them, then we can have quite an impact. But we're not there yet. So this is a fight, because it is a cultural change from being, let's say, passive or neutral, to take really part, to engage, to activate, and to go for a substance. And I see, and with this I close my presentation here, at least 2 areas where we should intervene massively with all our resources. One is what we can do as a global technoscientific, let's say, organization to combat global warming. And we are working since 2 years now to create the infrastructure, the means, the awareness that is necessary to do this. And the second is what we can contribute through our work and through our alliances we are building to the governance of the internet platforms, because it cannot continue to be the Wild West, and we are the law, as they say. It cannot be. So the question is what we can do, because we create these platforms, the technical people. So these are the two major things, and they are very much part of the digital humanism here, whether we call it like this. Our name already is very close to it. So you can consider us to be your ally, and we consider you to be our ally. And that's it for the time.
So we will take the questions at the end, just to make it quicker. Our next speaker was already introduced, Dietmar Schabus. He is online. He's also a computer scientist. He's in charge for AI at the Wiener Stadtwerke, and he's also a pioneer because he was the first to undergo a ethics certification process that Konstantinos mentioned, and I'm looking forward to the presentation on how he perceived it and the experience that he had here. Thank you, Dietmar. The floor is yours. I cannot see you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can see you.
Okay.
We don't see the screen yet, but
yes, I will share my slides in a second. Thank you, and hello everyone. I'm really glad I get to talk about my work a little bit here. Thanks everyone also for your important work in this area. Unfortunately, I can't be there in person. I really wanted to, but there are several kids and adults in my family have been out of order for a couple of days, not because of COVID, but some other virus infection. So I really didn't want to put this important community at risk. So I'm presenting remotely. Kurt Matthias, the vice rector, in his opening speech yesterday, talked about the motto of TU Wien, technology for people, and how the university has the policy that graduates, when they give their oath, they have to, this contains also a part about this topic of technology for people. And I remember very well when 13 years ago I gave this oath in the very hall next door where you had your coffee breaks in the Festsaal. So I really would have liked to pay the holy halls another visit, but okay, I have to present remotely today. Okay, let me share my slides. Let's try that. Can you see something, hopefully? Oops, sorry. So who am I? I'm Dietmar Schabus. I work for Wiener Stadtwerke. The Wiener Stadtwerke group is a infrastructure provider owned by the city of Vienna, and provides services in the areas of public transport, electricity, heating, cooling, gas, burial services, parking, and a couple of other things. So if you use public transport in Vienna, you've already used our services. And it's a fairly large organization with more than 15,000 employees. And yes, as Clara said, I work on AI topics and data topics for this group. It's maybe also worth mentioning that before that, I used to be a postdoc researcher in the research group of Brigitte Kren, who presented in the last session yesterday. And I was working on precisely the things that she talked about, namely the using machine learning and NLP technology for finding interesting things in user postings on newspaper websites. So you will see that my work that I talk about here today is closely related to that, of course, also. And what is it that I want to talk about? It's the very, very interesting and for us, a very nice project that we did together with the IEEE to try out the freshly developed certification program for AI solutions that the IEEE developed and that we put to test on a concrete system that we developed at Wiener Stadtwerke. So what I'm going to do is tell you a bit about the system that we built, and then about the certification procedure, how that was done for our concrete use case. Right. So technically it's a fairly simple setup. It's a AI categorization system for customer requests. So we receive at Wien Energie, our energy provider in the group, about 1,000 to 2,000 emails from customers per day. And the job of the AI system here is to automatically assign a category to each of the incoming emails. This was done in the past by a human, because later on specialized teams work on different topics. So this is a speed up process that was done manually already beforehand, and now it was decided that it would be helpful that a machine would take over only this first step of assigning which general topic is this customer talking about, and then where should we put it in our customer service department. So later on, a response or some actions and some response from a human operator in the customer service department will go back to the customer. So this is already an important point also for the ethical considerations of the system, because we have this certainty that there's always a human in the loop, and the human is at the end of the chain. So if something goes wrong with the system, it's not really that bad, because it can be any errors can be corrected by the final decision from a human. Okay, so from a technical perspective, it's a text classification problem, was really not so difficult to do. We had extremely nice data, like 500,000 emails from the past, where there were manual labels from the customer service experts who did this job manually in the past. So really you just push a few buttons and you have a model that will give you fairly good classification results. We achieve about 89% correct assignments, which is a huge win for the customer service department, because those 89% they don't have to look at anymore, and the 11% that are wrong are caught by the human operators that see, okay, this was assigned to me, but it's wrong here, I will reroute it, and customers don't even notice. Okay, so that's the system that we developed, and now we wanted to play the certification procedure through with this concrete system and this concrete use case in this concrete context. What were the steps involved here? It's 5 steps really that I put in this table here. Overall, you can see on the right that we were in exchange with an international panel of 5 IEEE experts over the course really of about a year, but that's a different story. We didn't all have enough time to dedicate to this project, especially on our side, I would say. But yes, okay, the 5 tasks that were to be done were first giving a comprehensive explanation from our side. What is the system that we developed? How does it work? What were the goals, the scope, the constraints, etc. of the project? So why did we build it? What were our thoughts on what we want to achieve and stuff like that? Who are the stakeholders? Which processes in our company are affected by this change of introducing the system, and which people are affected, etc. And the expert panel could ask questions and etc. so that they would get an understanding of our system and the context. Based on this information, then the expert panel provided a risk assessment. This was already following the procedures that are defined in the IEEE certification procedure. And the result of that, luckily for us, was that our concrete application poses a low risk of ethical problems. And the second output of this risk assessment is what's on step 3 here, that the most relevant criteria set from the 4 that the IEEE has developed was decided is the accountability criteria set. So the question of who is in charge and what happens if it doesn't work, and what does it really all mean, and how do things play when things go wrong, that was considered the most relevant and most interesting area for our application. And given those 2 things, low risk and accountability most relevant, we were then handed over a large list of homework, let's say. So we received 43 ethical criteria with descriptions, where we were then supposed to provide evidence and explanations. How do we address these 43 ethical points or arguments or fields or areas, and put together some documentation. So this was then quite some work, as you can see on the right here. It's no secret that this is it's a bunch of work. But yes, we did it, and it led to the submission of a formal document in the end that IEEE calls a case for ethics. And in the last step, it was IEEE's job to assess our submission and give actually also very, very valuable feedback to us about these things that we raised and that we described. So let me give you a few examples what these evidence criteria can be. Overall, you can say it's a very holistic examination of the use case and the organization that happens in this IEEE AI certification procedure. Here are 6 examples. I'm going to read only one on the left, one on the right. On the left, there are more technical criteria. For example, error analysis, where we were supposed to show how do we analyze errors of the system, how do we measure errors, what is an error even, how do we deal with errors in designing or changing the system, and how do we deal with errors in production runtime use, and stuff like that. Yeah, just make sure or convince the IEEE with our evidence, with our data, with our slides, whatever we have, that we thought about error analysis properly. And there are, on the other hand, more organizational criteria, like the last one on the right, on the bottom right. It's important that human authority and autonomy are maintained. So these are questions like, where are humans involved in the process of, because something was automated, right? Where do humans intervene? When do they intervene? What exactly do they do? What does it mean? If the person that's supposed to intervene is not there, who's in charge next? And if that person's not there, who's in charge then, etc., etc. So these are things that you put together some information for. And what are the evidence or the information that you put together? What does that look like? There can be a bunch of different things. I'm going to read maybe the main diagonal of this table here. So we provided the system architecture. How did we build our system? How does it connect to other systems? We presented data analysis results from beforehand, just the training data, and also like error analysis and things like that. And we gave role definitions of our organization to show how we use the system and how everything plays together. Maybe let me add here also that this also includes things that were discussed yesterday, the question of the objective function or the explainability, or the ex ante explainability at least, as Michael Stampf, I think, called it. So what you show here is also that how did you train the system? What did you train it for? Which data did you use? Is the data representative? These things are included here. So I think that's fairly important. It's true that it's difficult to show how the final system really makes it a particular individual decision, but at least you can show how did you build the system. And overall, this produced a whole bunch of things that we submitted. So our case of ethics document was more than 150 pages that we submitted. And yeah, it was quite some work, as I said, but we were happy to do it, to show that we are responsible provider of services for the city of Vienna. And after the assessment was complete, we were super proud and super happy to turn out to be the first institution in the world to finish this new certification program. And the IEEE and also some politicians and the vice head of our group paid some goods. So we had some goods honor to be in a press event in the Vienna City Hall. As you can see here, we received this nice oversized certification document, and we're happy to share this information with the world. If you like to read more about this, I invite you to read my blog post that the IEEE has published. There's an URL here and a QR code. So if you're interested, then please take a look. Thank you very much. That's about that.
We have one very important question, so let's take one.
Thank you for your presentation. The question is it a paperwork or is it really tested by IEEE? So do you have real test cases made together with IEEE, or was it paper document exchange?
It's mainly written documentation, because I think it was also important for IEEE that everything is documented, that you can see that even a half year later, 1 year later, you have the evidence still there, and you can say, okay, we didn't just talk about it and we were convinced it was okay, but here are the documents that prove it. Test cases in the classical sense, I think it's pretty difficult because you would have to tailor things to a concrete system. So the ethical questions raised by the certification procedure are very broad, and many things are considered. And I think IEEE did a good job in covering a very holistic picture. But of course, it's true that in your answers, there's only going to be what's in your answers, and then it's the question of how does the IEEE decide it? Should they believe what you put in there or not? So overall, I'm pretty sure the system can be and will need to be improved, but I'm also convinced that this is a very important step in the direction of not just self-assessment. You know, you say you do things like we also heard yesterday, in the classification of smartphone apps. Maybe the providers of the apps say, okay, we don't take any data, but they still do. Here, at least, you have an external and I think trustworthy, and also from the expertise and trustworthy it's institution that says, okay, we took a closer look and we asked the hairy questions, and we think this company has done a good job in trying to provide an ethically sound application.
Maybe if I can just add that it is, of course, risk-based. So the certification is tailored to the risk level. As Dietmar mentioned, this was considered a low-risk application, so it was considered to be sufficient to understand the measures, the governance measures that are being put in place for false negatives and something like that, without going on a field and testing. Of course, if you have a higher risk application, I agree with you, we absolutely need to test as well. And maybe I can also say that we don't want to be the certifier afterwards. So this was for us a proof of concept. We see ourselves as the custodians of the criteria, and which can be further developed, and it's then to the certification bodies of what exactly they would like, how they would like to test those criteria. So thank you for that question. Thank you, Dietmar, as well. So I would like to continue with the question of data. So I think we cannot talk about digital humanism without talking about data. And here we have now an interesting approach, namely synthetic data. How can they contribute to digital humanism? How do you evaluate synthetic data? And I'm looking forward to the presentation from Alexandra Ebert, who is from a startup, I still can say it's a startup, which is also here in Vienna, mostly.ai, and she's the Chief Trust Officer. So looking forward to your presentation.
So while the presentation is being set up, thank you very much for the welcoming words. It's a pleasure to be here, since digital humanism is also something that's personally very important to me. We already heard about, it's also the question of how can we actually implement it in practice. And today I want to introduce a technology that's potentially new for some of the audience members, which of course won't be the silver bullet solution to all of the challenges we face with digital humanism, but I hope it can contribute in some significant forms, particularly in regards to privacy protection, data democratization, and also ensuring fairness in artificial intelligence. So when we talk about digital humanism, or now also increasingly about trustworthy AI, there are various criteria that should be taken into account when it comes to making sure that the system is human-centric and trustworthy. It can be fairness, it can be explainability, accountability, privacy, security. Many of those criteria, I think, are very well known by the audience, so I won't spend too much detail on them, but I just want to state here that synthetic data is an enabling technology that can contribute quite to a few of those areas or pillars of digital humanism and also of responsible or trustworthy AI. But I want to start with the question of privacy. Why is synthetic data nowadays needed for privacy protection? If we look at GDPR, we see that anonymous data is exempt from GDPR. So you don't have to fulfill the obligations of this privacy regulation if you work with truly anonymous data that can't be re-identified. The challenge that both the industries are facing, but also scientific organizations, is that we have with legacy anonymization techniques a significant privacy utility trade-off. This graphic here is just for illustration, but it boils down to the point you can either have fully anonymous data or useful data. It's impossible with legacy anonymization techniques to have both. There's a myriad of papers out there, of newspaper articles that with legacy anonymization techniques like masking or obfuscating or aggregation, you can't successfully protect personal identifiable information and citizens' privacy. It's too easy in a big data environment and with the high dimensionality of data sets that we nowadays have to protect information with these technologies. And that is the exact reason why synthetic data is needed to ensure that we can anonymize data in a way that can't be reverted back to the original data subject's information, while still preserving the utility of the data that we need to make data-driven innovation and AI innovation possible. If you haven't heard of synthetic data before, the easiest way to understand it is by looking at pictures. These specific pictures, I would assume everybody would agree, look super realistic. But as you can guess it, they're not real humans. They're synthetic faces that were generated by a research project already a few years ago by NVIDIA, where they trained algorithms on hundreds of thousands of human pictures, up to the point where these deep learning algorithms fully understood how a human face looked like. So the pictures that you can see here are not just shuffled around and have the eyes of training sample A and the mouth of training sample B, but it's learning the logics, understanding where eyes are positioned, how big noses are, what skin shades we have, to create completely artificial but super realistic and representative data. And this is the same concept that you can not only apply to unstructured data, like in that case images, but also to structured data. And this is what we do at mostly.ai. We work with some of the leading banks, some of the leading insurance organizations, healthcare providers, research institutions, to help them create a synthetic replica of the original but privacy-sensitive data that is as good as the real stuff, but completely anonymous and impossible to re-identify. How does this work? We don't create the data out of scratch, we don't dream it up, but we provide this technology to organizations so that the algorithm we've developed can learn on original production data, extract all the statistics, the correlations, the time dependencies, for example, in a financial transaction data set or in medical data. And then once this training is completed, a completely separate synthetic data set is generated that has all the same statistical distributions, the same correlations, the same time dependencies, but it just doesn't have any data point that reflects to a real data subject anymore. The use cases for synthetic data, there are vast use cases. So it's basically an enabling technology where you can create data that's privacy safe to use it for AI training, analytics, research, open data, data democratization, for testing purposes, to collaborate with startups or external vendors, and many, many other use cases. In the context of digital humanism, I also want to highlight the role of synthetic data for AI governance and the possibility of having audits of AI systems where it's just not sufficient to give access to a model. You need to have data to understand how the model behaves and where there are areas you need to put your attention to. So talking about data democratization and open data, what I personally am really passionate about is seeing the applications of synthetic data, not only in the economy, but also for societal good and AI for good initiatives. So for example, there's one thing I want to share in that case. It's from a private company, it's Humana, an US insurance that's focusing on healthcare. And they've published an open synthetic data set with 1.5 million synthetic customers in their healthcare records to facilitate research and foster collaboration. But it's not only that sector. It's, for example, also the Joint Research Center of the European Commission that recently conducted a feasibility study of our technology because they want to make openly available a synthetic, fully anonymous version of 50 million EU citizens with their cancer data records. to give them to democratize the data access, because currently just a very privileged group of researchers can have access, and it's also not openly accessible to make effective data-driven policy decisions. Also, the city of Vienna, we've heard it over and over again, that they are on the forefront of digital humanism, and also when it comes to open data, they are also evaluating synthetic data and looking into the ways they can utilize it to give more startups, more SMEs, and also more researchers access to the data that they need to innovate and create data-driven and AI initiatives that are not only beneficial for the economy, but also for society. And just a few weeks ago, also the German Ministry of Health set up a tender for synthetic data to have data that's realistic, but fully anonymous, and help them to digitize their healthcare initiatives. How many more minutes do I have? 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Okay, I'm going super quick. Last aspect I want to share. The beauty of synthetic data is that it not only helps with privacy and thus makes it possible to open up data access and increase the diversity of people who can work and collaborate on it. Since it's synthetically generated, one other thing becomes possible. You can create data that not only reflects the world as it is today, but as you would like it to see. You can make data, for example, fairer. I'm not going into detail of why fairness and bias is a problem in AI. I assume this is common knowledge in this audience here, and there are plenty of reasons why AI systems become biased. But one main cause is oftentimes the data. And you can see it quite easily if you look in the real world. The distributions of hair colors or skin tones look significantly different to what you see in gold standard data sets, like here in the middle, which leads to subpar performance for minority groups or for groups which were minority in the data set but aren't minorities in the real world. Balanced data set are some way to overcome this, and synthetic data can help you with this. Again, because it's easier to illustrate work from NVIDIA, we do the same thing with structured data. Here you can create new examples that have never existed before to boost the diversity of the data set, to create more minority examples and ensure that the signal strength becomes strong enough so that algorithms can successfully pick up the patterns of minority groups and also work properly for those. And we are researching since 2 years now fair synthetic data, which was also featured by IEEE Spectrum, Forbes, and many other mediums, where we're trying to bring this to healthcare data, to financial transaction data, to help solve this bias problem here. But it's not only about making the data more diverse, it's giving organizations access in a privacy sensitive, in a privacy safe way to sensitive attributes, because one of the biggest challenges for fairness practitioners nowadays is laws prohibit them to use sensitive attributes. So they're operating in the blind and can't successfully mitigate biases. With synthetic data, they can take this into account and make sure that the system truly performs equal to each party that comes in contact with it. And of course, what I highlighted earlier, audits. Fairness is such a new topic, and I'm talking with many leading but also just starting fairness practitioners in the AI domain. And for them, oftentimes it's super difficult to find out what is actually fair, what are the regulatory requirements, which is why now we see AI auditing and assurance ecosystems being created. For example, in the UK, but also many private insurance companies I'm talking with are currently looking into how can they offer AI audits. And there they've also understood that synthetic data will become an integral part to really help look under the hood of an algorithm and give a proper, meaningful certification that tells you whether there's bias in the system or not. So I'm closing with that. I mean, we also have the synthetic data IEEE activity. We're working on currently standards for synthetic data in the whole industry. If somebody here is interested to learn more, you can find this online. But since I'm out of time, I'm jumping to my last statement, where I'm just wanting to leave you with, for digital humanism, data is seen as the fifth element. And I think it's increasingly important that not only a privileged group of big tech companies and experts has access to data, but that it's much more diverse, and that the whole spectrum of human diversity can see and collaborate and innovate with data, because otherwise I'm really doubtful whether we can create something that truly benefits everyone. So thank you very much, and I'm very much looking forward to the questions later.
Alexandra, I very much like this argument. Let's create the data set as you would like to have it. But I can imagine that it's not a discussion that we have to do just ourselves, but we have to do it with the digital, with the humanities in mind as well. So hopefully in these working groups, there are going to be also interested parties from the user group and from society as well. I see an immediate question or two. Let's take it because we have one more, we have actually one more presentation. So let's take these two questions.
Very quickly. Thanks, Alexandra, for the presentation. I'm Eric Brem. We've been in touch only the other day. This is the face. A couple of years ago, I had the pleasure of being with one of your colleagues in Singapore when mostly I was still very young. And I discussed with Michael Platzer some of the challenges. And one of the major challenges at that time was that people simply didn't understand, A, and B, didn't believe what you're proposing to do. So has this changed? Or how much effort is it still for you to explain that what you're doing is solid and that, you know, it can be done and things like that? Thank you.
It definitely has changed. I mean, still synthetic data is not an ubiquitous technology that's known by everybody, and also the terminology is not clearly defined. But as I showed with the Ministry of Health in Germany, who just gave a tender for synthetic data specifically, or also, for example, the European Data Protection Supervisor naming synthetic data as one of the most important privacy technologies to currently evaluate. And we've also seen some policy suggestions on European Parliament level, and therefore I would say it has significantly changed, but there's still a way to go specifically to make this connection, how it can help to achieve Europe's goals of becoming the global responsible AI leader where we need this data.
Thank you. One more question.
But there's also a disturbing side in this, because how do I know whether what I see is a real thing or something that is synthetic? Do you make sure that there's a clear statement that this is synthetic?
That's a very good question. So for example, also when we look in the AI Act, how it's currently drafted, there's this requirement in there. Then whenever you have deep fakes, which is of course specifically relevant to unstructured synthetic data with videos and images, you clearly state that this is synthetic. With the synthetic data itself, of course, it's also important that you label it and organizations know it's synthetic. The question of trust comes more in, can I really trust the data to replicate my production data that I might not be able to see? And this is always a journey for organizations. So initially, of course, there's some mistrust, but we had so many cases, for example, also with Erste Group here in Vienna, who was one of our first customers, where they told us, hey, there must be some bug in your data. We are seeing so strange financial transaction behaviors, they can't be real. And then they went through all the procedures to look into production data and figured out, this is how our customers behaving. This is how they're getting their incomes. And therefore they learned that with synthetic data, they just can democratize the understanding and the pairs of eyes who can look into the data. But this is also one part of the work we're doing with the Standards Initiative to find metrics and measures that can give you a quick overview of, okay, I'm actually getting the real thing from the utility and statistics and analytics point of view, or are there some artifacts in there? But in general, it's so close to the real thing that organizations really now already use it to train AI models on this data and then immediately deploy it in production, because it is the real or the kind of same statistical utility as production data, but just privacy safe.
Thank you. And I think that this discussion already shows that what we need now that we have these tools, standard certification, skills, and so on, is really the governance. So the governance that basically defines what kind of instruments to use, where we need the checks, what is considered as being risk, and so on. So I'm really looking forward to discuss this with Anja Kaspersen. She is the senior fellow at the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs. And looking forward to your ideas on how to operationalize digital humanism from the governance level. Thank you.
You say when I was, first of all, thank you for having me here. And as I was sort of pondering, you know, this title of digital humanism, I was going back and forth, you know, what I actually thought about it. Isn't it more about humanizing or making human digitalization? And then I was also looking at human digitalism. So I had to look up this word because I was thinking, is digitalism even a word? It is. It's actually if you overconsume onto unhealthy degrees of a very specific plant. But there are some correlation when you overconsume of certain types of digitals that may sort of remove the humanism. So I'm sort of still torn on the title. Are we talking about digital humanism, or are we talking about humanizing digitalization, right? So it's just something, pondering as I was going through the manifesto. So I actually prepared a presentation because I wanted to stick with the time. And I really appreciate all the fascinating insights. I have a bunch of questions for Alexandra and also to Dietmar, to come back to afterwards. And of course, it's always a benefit to go last because you can reflect on sort of some of the things that you heard. And I would like to actually kick off by sharing a little excerpt from a poem. It's a very unusual way of starting a conversation about ethics and governance and AI and technology, but that often comes to mind when discussing ethics and the impact of technology, and also what it means to be human, which is very much at the core of the manifesto. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with this work, and this one is called A Road Not Taken. And I'll read this excerpt. Knowing how way leads unto way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverge in the wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Why am I bringing this up? Well, like the traveler is aware that way leads on to way, one decision leads to another, and another, and another, and it goes on. And that she, he, they will never be faced with the same decision again. What this poem represents to be are the choices and experiences guiding what road we take. The complexities lies in how we view the roads, what meaning we attribute to it. You can see now the relevance, right, to choices that will impact on digital humanism, human digitalization, whatever we call it. And the current AI discourse, as is also brilliantly captured in the manifesto, revolves around a similar roads not taken conundrum and a core question. Will the human condition be improved through digital technologies and AI? Or will digital technologies and AI, including synthetic data, transform the human condition in ways that undermine the basic tenets which enable a semblance of human cooperation? Now, if both are true, and you point to some of these conundrums in the manifesto, if both are true to some degree, how can we manage the trade-offs, enhance the benefits, and limit potential harms to human society and the environment? That's what we all gathered here to discuss. What will it mean to be human in 2022, 2032, and 2042? Are humanists constantly being transformed by technological possibilities? And there are many reasons as to why these questions have become so central, and why I would argue why we need to therefore re-envision ethics as a tool to enhance our ability to grapple with and engage with the inherent tensions, trade-offs in different ways that we're doing today. As the manifesto points out, and I quote, digital technologies do not emerge from nowhere. They're shaped by implicit and explicit choices, and thus incorporate a set of values, norms, I would add cultures, economic interest and security interest. I think we're all seeing that right now, and assumptions about how the world around is or should be. Many of these choices remain hidden in software programs, implementation algorithms that remain invisible, quote over. And indeed, once a road has been taken, maybe layered with a few invisible paths, and systems embedded with varying degrees of accuracy and maturity embedded in the parameters of what it means to be human, we will indeed never be faced with the same decision again. So with such high stakes, why aren't the rules and governance of AI systems more clear? Allow me to share a few thoughts. First, our failure to address the ethics of digital technologies and AI specifically is not from lack of effort. We heard some very practical examples of efforts being done by IEEE. I think the work around certification, your work around synthetic data, there's a lot to be built on. Nevertheless, there's been a search of principles and guidance, roadmaps, if you may, to build on the poem to support responsible development and use of AI without much significant change. For impact, however, at the crossroads referred to in the manifesto, we must drill down to three main issues. And this builds on work that I've been doing with Carnegie Council, also with my co-lead for this initiative called Wendell Wallach. First, we need to broaden the existing dialogues around the ethics and rules of the road for AI. The conversation about AI and ethics needs to be cracked wide open to understand the subtleties and life cycle of AI systems and their impacts at each stage. Way too often in the current discourse, we're focusing on just specific moments of that life cycle without looking at the full life cycle of an AI system, because the governance put in place need to then adapt to where we are in the life cycle. Too often these talks lack a far enough reach and focus solely on the development deployment stages of the life cycle, although many of the problems occur during the earlier stages of conceptualization, research and design, both of which was referred to by Alexandra and Dietmar in the work that they've been doing. Or else they fail to comprehend when and if an AI system will operate at a stage of maturity required to avoid failure within complex adaptive systems. Another problem is that companies and stakeholders may focus on the theater of ethics, seeming to promote so-called AI for good, while ignoring aspects that are more fundamental and problematic. This is known in my field as ethics washing, or rather creating a superficially reassuring but illusory sense that ethical issues are being addressed to justify pressing forward with systems that end up in deepening problematic patterns. This is actually an interesting intersection with what is happening in the climate mitigation field, this sort of ethics washing or sustainability washing, that we're not speaking on these issues from a perspective of reciprocity, but rather how we do what we want to do anyways, but slightly with a greener sort of sign in front of it, you know, so we wash the purpose, but we don't really change our ways. While ethics talk is often about underscoring the differing trade-offs that correspond with various courses of action, true ethical oversight rests on addressing what's not being accommodated by the options selected, the roads not taken. This vital, often overlooked part of the process is a stumbling block for those trying to address the ethics of AI and the governance of AI. Two, the talk about AI ethics is not being translated into meaningful action. Too often those in charge of developing, embedding, and deploying AI systems and technology systems in general fail to understand how they work or what potential they might have to shift power, perpetuate existing inequalities, and creating a great risk of creating new ones. Overstating the capabilities of technology is a well-known problem, and particularly in the AI research field, this is a well-known, and has led to a complacency toward understanding the actual problems that they've been designed to solve, as well as identifying potential problems downstream. They believe that incompetent, immature AI system, once deployed, can be remedied by a human on the loop, or assumption that an antidote exists, especially compatible with issues such as cybersecurity, is an erroneous and potentially dangerous illusion. Dietmar was speaking about the human control aspect of it. I've done some work around this, you know, and too often we are over-investing in our belief in what the system can do and under-investing in the human capabilities to actually operate with those systems. And there's a lot of fallacies around the human control, which there's a few articles out on the Carnegie Council website, which I recommend for those interested in just challenging our own notions and thoughts around these issues. We see this lack, and we meaning, so the people in the Carnegie Council initiative, we see this lack of comprehension demonstrated in decision-making structures, opening for a road of myopic tech deterministic narrative and applying tech solutionist and optimization approaches to global industry and societal challenges, often blinded by what's on offer rather than focus on what the problem actually requires. To have a true understanding of the ethics of AI, we need to listen to a much more inclusive cast of experts and stakeholders, including those who grasp the potential downstream consequences and limitations of AI, such as the environmental impact of the resources required to build, train, and run an AI system or a technology system in general, its interoperability with other systems, and also the feasibility of safely and securely interrupting such a system once it has been deployed. Too often the dialogue around technology for humanity, AI, all of this is synthetic data, whatever the issue is confined to the ivory tower. And concepts such as ethics, equality, and governance can be viewed as lofty and abstract. So we need to ground this discussion in discerning meaningful responsibility and culpability. That's core to ethics and core to this whole discussion around re-envisioning ethics in the information age. What does it mean? How do we make ethics a palatable, a useful concept, not something that exists in the lofty and the abstract? And anyone that assumes that systems, especially those with AI embedded into them, are apolitical by nature would be incorrect, especially when these systems are embedded in situations or confronted with tasks that they were not created and trained for. I think that's one issue that we can probably really speak to in terms of synthetic data. You know, the purpose of, you know, the design purpose, what hasn't been designed to operate towards, and if it's then being reutilized or repurposed using that same synthetic data to do something completely different, to we assure the same level of accuracy with the output? And these are very core governance and ethical dilemmas that you might find the perfect way of governing one set of synthetic data towards one set of goals, but if the goal is being changed midway or all of a sudden utilized for doing something different, does that governance then become relevant, and where are the ethical dilemmas and the adaptation required for that oversight to be ethical? And part of the solution and the challenge is finding a shared language for reconceptualizing ethics and for dealing with these sometimes unfamiliar and implicit tensions and trade-offs. I mean, it's known large-scale technological transformations have always led to deep societal, economic, and political change, and it has always taken time to figure out how to talk about it publicly and to establish safe and ethical practices. But I would argue that time is running out, and it's quite urgent we do that now. The first line in the manifesto posits that the system is failing and that the stakes are indeed high. And to grapple with them, we need to be willing to engage in a much broader societal engagement that puts focus on the lateral, scientific, and anthropological intelligence. And I really enjoyed the previous speaker that was referring to Norway's successes in the latest Olympic. I'm Norwegian for, I should declare that, and this focus on cross-training, attributing some of the success of the Norwegian athletes, to the fact that they're being allowed to cross-train at an early age. And I think we need to do some of that similar thing when we talk about governance of technologies, the governance of AI, I think in particular, which is part of my focus, which means how do you create a safe environment to bring out a much bigger cast of multi-potentialites, of polymaths, the people who have this broad interest, allowed to do the cross-training. What I can tell you, there's very little space in work life for those people. There's definitely even less space for these people in research. You may come out of this may be your area of interest, but once you try to fit into the broader frameworks and the broader structures, you're very quickly told to become much more narrow if you're going to succeed, if you're going to get that grant, if you're going to get that next job. So the incentives is not in place to bring about that cross-training currently that is so much needed, and the former speaker was talking to. There's also a need to foster a much greater public space ethics. How do we discuss these issues? Not just who we bring in. We need the diversity. We need a multi-potentiality. But how, do we have the right places to have these discussions? I learned this word. I was in Greece not too long ago, where I learned this beautiful Greek word, phronesis. We need much more practical wisdom in how we promote those public ethics discussions, allowing new voices. And the last one, we need to ask, what are the foundational roads, going back to Frost's poem? What is our vision? Short term, medium, long? Who gets to decide? And too often the discussion gets caught up in reinforcing frameworks that are ambiguous at best and merely serve to post-rationalize roads taken, not truly grappling with the ethical considerations, the risk of ethics washing, and the multifaceted nuances required to provide the necessary ethical oversight. So I would say best way of looking at this going forward, let's lean into the complex gray areas, apply some heavy dose of phronesis, and we will get to a much better path in terms of governance and oversight.
And I think it's going to be also an interesting question on how to do this governance with the technology changing, but also, as you just said, also the whole environment changing. So how to be adaptive in the governance as well. So I would be happy now to take questions from the audience in the room, and of course also on site. I think I have to move there.
Thanks so much. A quick reaction to the last presentation, which I thought was a tour de force of of ethics and AI, and it's always a big challenge. So let me just reflect on it a little bit. I think you pointed to some massive challenges, such as the interlinkage of these different topics. So if I understood you correctly, I mean, so we are discussing AI as if it was a standalone technology, but of course it links with privacy, it links with all those other aspects, and that makes it so very hard to debate. It does not only make it hard to debate in let's say AI or in one little field, but it makes it particularly hard also scientifically to talk about it. Because you mentioned that there is this hype, people are overestimating the technology very much. And I want to defend one of my disciplines, which is computer science, because my feeling is that they are actually relatively innocent in that respect. Those who mostly overestimate the technology are actually more, in my experience, for example, the philosophers. I also have a philosophy head, so I spend half my time at least in the philosophy department explaining to them that what they are discussing about AI is science fiction, which is also fine in a philosophy department. You can do that, but it is just not a good way of spending your time, because we have so many concrete, as you said, practical problems that we really need to target those. And I would also like to add, much of the problems that we discuss with AI today are really general IT problems. This is inseparable. It's no longer, it's also when you look at the definition of what the Commission uses, I mean, this is basically IT and not just AI. So I'm not sure there was a question in there, but I hope you can react.
100%,
Good point.
I 100% agree with you. And I would say, adding to the philosophers, I think a lot of the hype and the overconfidence also comes from people with money invested.
Yeah, that's actually right. Yeah.
Just before anyone else who would like to react? Okay.
Yeah,
please,
I very much agree with this, and I think this is highly problematic what is happening, because instead of trying to address the real problems, they distract the attention to imaginary one, and this is not innocent. There is money behind this. This is not innocent.
Just one remark. There's in technology, we overestimate on the short run, but we underestimate on the long run. I think this is a saying from an American scientist. I think there's one underlying question, or let's say issue, in all your presentations. And this, how to come on the political layer, how to come to political decision makers, because at the end, we are talking about frameworks, we are talking about legislation, we are talking about regulation. Even certification is a kind of regulation. So I think the issue, what we are discussing within this digital humanism, how to come on the policy layer. At the end, it's about politics, okay? It's saying it's not ethics, everything, but at the end, it's about politics. And I think this was somehow underlying all your excellent presentations. Thank you.
Please.
Let's take it. Anja first.
Sure.
Please, yes.
I think this is an excellent point. I think one of the dangers currently is that we're all catering into, inadvertently so, this tech deterministic narratives. We lost sight that this is a fundamental human story. As it says in the manifesto, we make the decisions. And yet we gotten to this point where decision makers feel very alienated from all of this. One thing is hard to grapple with some of the technical nature of what we're discussing, distinguishing between them, understanding, speaking to what the previous speaker was saying about, computer science, we're speaking about data problems, kind of classical IT known problems. But because this tech deterministic narrative, sort of gives this illusion very much rooted in sci-fi, it's just going to evolve, the pace and scale of technological change, the massive transformations. And all of a sudden you find yourself there, it's like, well, there's nothing I can do. It's just going to happen without me. And in terms of how to engage policymakers, so I went through, I can hold it, okay. So I do a lot of engagement in various jobs. I do a lot of engagement with those in positions of making decisions. And, initially I will come in and do my kind of very studious approach and trying to, as a layman, trying to break down, what are all these concepts? What's cyber, what's AI, what's ledger technology, and sort of, doing a more scholarly approach to it. But then I realized I had lost everyone within 10 seconds. So I turned it around and I said to a parliamentarian, for example, how many years have you been a parliamentarian? And as we all know, this is becoming a profession these days, you know, so you would have answers like 10, 20, 30 years. Next question. How many, during those, whatever, 10, 20, 30 years, how many legislations have you passed? Well, in the hundreds. Then my third question. How many of them have had impact on humans? Well, all of them. I said, well, congratulations. You are now an expert on technological systems and AI. Because that's fundamentally what we're trying to do. We're trying to question, does these systems have an impact that we can or cannot foresee? And that should guide, you know, the way you engage with your role as a governor, as a role as a regulator. But so I think one of the core problems we're facing right now, which is core to ethics and why I believe ethics is such an important toolkit to allow us to do it, is that we lost our ability to ask questions. Good questions about impact, about what we know, about what we don't know. I mean, you were speaking about structured and unstructured data, both of which involves a very different set of governance responses, right? Because one can be highly weaponized in the terms of deep fakes, and the other one can actually help us preserve privacy. But it requires completely different approaches. And to do that, we simply have to enable people, empower them, encourage them to ask questions and not be carried away with the sort of tech deterministic stuff, which some of the people that focus on long-term existential risks, as Konstantinos was saying, is not innocent. It is a purposeful play to move the goalpost to somewhere where it can't really be managed. And that worries me deeply at a personal level.
I pass.
Oh, then maybe I want to say, because as in my role, I'm actually engaging quite a lot with regulators and also helping them to see through the challenges that we have with privacy, synthetic data, and responsible AI. I wouldn't say it boils down to politics. Of course, politics is a super important puzzle piece, because if we don't have the regulators requesting and asking for ethical components of the technology, we won't get it in the industry. But we also need the other puzzle pieces, and we also need the ways that show industry how they can actually achieve that, because I'm also engaging quite a lot with, for example, leading fairness practitioners, and they're just simply trying to figure out their ways how they can actually achieve that, and their also standards and certifications can help them to guide a way on where it has to go. So I think it really needs both. But of course, politicians have to understand what are the challenges that we currently have to tackle today, what's science fiction. And I think one of the biggest challenges, especially in the European Union, I see, is that all the interdependent, I can't speak anymore. Thank you. Everybody knows what I'm trying to get out, but I just can't. So I think this is one of the big challenges, because especially with artificial intelligence, but also with the other technologies we have nowadays, there's impact on so many areas of human lives, and this connectedness, I think, is so hard to grapple for policymakers. And we see so many regulations now being put out which just simply don't take into account some other things. And I think some coordination here in the holistic perspective is something that's desperately needed to ensure that we really achieve something that benefits all of us.
Just before giving the floor to the next question, I just wanted to say there is also, let's say, a structured approach on how to do this. So one of the focus areas of IEEE in Europe, in Vienna, is public policy. So we have a public policy committee. We are engaging volunteers, and we are taken very seriously because we're neutral. So we are not defending any industrial interests. And so we actually engage with all of these initiatives. So on the Commission level, on the OECD level, on the Council of Europe level, UNESCO level, and so on. So all of you who are IEEE members and are interested in this, or we can also, of course, collaborate on that. We can do this together. And I think it's our duty to do this. Please.
I was intrigued by the case described by the Wiener Stadtwerke, which shows that policies have to go down to the level of organizations, in particular in the case of public organizations, and it shows the following point basically. So many of the projects that are now the new project, they are started by companies and public organizations. They deal with technology, but again, it's technology that's affecting humans in a way or another. So in this case, there was a kind of, let's say, after facto discussion verifying whether the decisions made in the project affected in some way, humans in a wrong way. But what happens is that you need this kind of deliberation before. So you would need within an organization, I would call it maybe an ethical committee or somebody which is the place where you discuss, projects that have an impact on society, on people, and so on. And organizations need to develop policies to handle those projects. So it's fine, to verify afterwards if your project was compliant with, let's say, certain principles. And it's great that the IEEE is spelling out those principles that you should follow in your design, and you should verify that you follow them. And so it gives you the weapons for, developing your project and eventually assessing the quality of your project. But you need some a priori discussion, about the choices, because after, in the end, it would be too late if you only do it after the project.
We got it.
Please, Konstantinos.
Perhaps I can take this, Dietmar. You are very right, and I said it, but it was very cryptic. We did both. We have a system for assessing the quality of existing systems, and we have a standard of how to do this design work. And this.
That's not enough. You also need the organization to be ready.
But, I mean, yes, but the question is, do the organization want to use this standard? But we have developed this standard. It must be something. So we did this already. And the initiative for this, the momentum, the energy came also from Vienna. It is a standard of how to embed such type of values in the design of systems. So we have it. It exists a few months ago, and we're developing now an assessment suite for the standard. That means how can organizations prove that they follow these standards in the design of their systems? And of course, this can be used for the development of new systems. So we did both.
Please, yes.
Actually, building on this, you are talking about something like ethic by design, not following what has been done for privacy. But my question is rather different. The AI Act and the new regulation that it's foreseen, and it's one of the pillars of a new regulation is certification. And we have seen that certification can be very cumbersome and very difficult to achieve, even with a lot of effort, even with a very simple and low priority. I was referring to the other talk. And so I just would like to know what is your opinion, if actually certification as we are thinking of, it's a viable tool, or how we can help in making things easier and affordable and sustainable. And that's just.
Yes. So when we started to develop these tools, our question was, will anybody use them? Because this is additional work for a company, for a city administration, it's additional work. So we didn't know, but we were assuming there would be a demand, because these systems are very intrusive in our everyday life. And if you try to just go ahead and break and make things, you will break your neck. And this is what happened to Google in Toronto. And this is what happened with most contact tracking applications in Europe. They broke their necks, because it is not just technical. You have to gain the trust of the citizens. So how can you do this? And what we are offering here is a way how to do it and how to prove you have done it. And there are cases where it is worth investing there, because otherwise you will break your neck. You will lose all your investments. So it is worth, and it saves money, and it saves energy, in our opinion. Not in all cases, but in the very critical cases. And we have got some very interesting, let's say, cases now from the city of Vienna, which is very intriguing. But if you don't do this, then they will not succeed, because the citizens will go read on the streets. So this is I mean, it is almost unavoidable. And we have been preparing the tools to enable, in particular, the public sector to show they really mean with what they say, and they don't do other things on the back of these systems. So I hope this answers your question. There is not an easy answer, but there is a necessity and there is a demand, and we receive a lot of demand. Now, our problem is how to make this scalable, because we don't want to do this whole work that Dietmar has shown. There must be other intermediaries doing this, and we train now the intermediaries before we deploy it and make it public and so on. So this is a lot of work, and we're investing a lot of money and resources there. It is not a business model for us. It is part of our, let's say, promise to deploy technology for humanity. This is how we see it.
Alexandra or Dietmar, would you like also to comment on this?
I could, but I'm not sure if you have time.
Very quickly.
Okay,
I
very
mean,
quickly.
Do you think that?
I mean, I understood the question on the stance on certification in general, and I think it's an important piece, but I think it's alone is not sufficient and also not a feasible option from an economic standpoint. I think we need the whole spectrum certification, particularly also for the higher risk cases. We need also the tools that help organizations to actually quickly develop systems that fulfill responsible AI requirements in that context, for example, because so many people we have out there are not even AI experts. Maybe they can work with some of the toolboxes that are available by big providers, but they're for sure not responsible AI experts. And to make this scalable, we need to have the tools, we need to have the monitoring tools, we need to be able to constantly assess the systems. We need the regulations that are in place. We need clarification from the regulators how to fulfill all of this. We have plenty of anti-discrimination laws currently, which are well intended, but lead to more discrimination by AI currently. So there needs to happen some clarification. And just so many pieces that really have to work together. So I think certifications are for sure important, but it's a whole pipe and a whole chain, and so many things are needed there.
It's a whole ecosystem. Yeah. I would agree. So please, the next question.
Just briefly, three requests to the IEEE. Firstly, you mentioned a bunch of Viennese experts developed the standard. Is the list publicly available? Who did it?
Yes, you can. I mean, this is no secret.
Okay.
There are two different things. One is the standard, which is a standard which was a formal standard of how to embed ethical values in system design. And in every standard, you have the list of all people who participate, who voted. Okay. 70 or something like this. And then this is the certification scheme, which was developed by panels of experts. And you have seen the faces here on the photograph, and the names are also public, of course.
And second, the list of 5 evaluators, is this also publicly available?
Yes.
Okay, okay. And lastly, does this mean that a company or institution under certification has to submit documents to America or to experts based in America? You know how sensitive? I mean, we talk about all this of the whole list documents, okay, which usually I would never give out to anybody, okay? And you expect me that I, as a company, send it to America?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by stand. First of all, we sign NDAs with the companies while doing this. Also for our intellectual property, we're delivering a lot of intellectual property to the company. They see our full set of criteria and so on, which is not public. There are several levels which are public, but not everything. So it is a mutual trust, which is based on legal agreements, NDAs and so on. Secondly, I mean, I'm not sure anything is sent to America. All these projects have been developed with European experts, and all the experts you saw are European experts, and we're a global organization. I'm not sure that you are, let's say, leaking of information to America. We're not Americans.
There's a legal framework for data.
I don't see any American here among the, but I mean, we have headquarters in America, but also our legal basis in Europe. When you do such a thing, then you communicate information to somewhere.
So it stays within Europe. Okay.
The question is whether you trust them,
okay.
the entity.
I think that it was a proof of concept, but I really have to think. I think that in the panel there was not one American. There were Canadians, there were Europeans, and some of
you know how sensitive the issue is.
Yes, but I don't think that there was. But again, you're right. I mean, in general, if we're talking about certification bodies, it's also about IP. That's also a question. how can you do transparency with IP issues? But basically, you have to have a trusted entity, a third party that if you want, that is also governed. There's a governance of certification authorities as well. So you need to have this whole ecosystem in place.
And maybe I can add something also to this. So when we set up the pilot project for Wiener Stadtwerke together with IEEE, there was a whole, it took some time to get the legal stuff in order. So I agree with Konstantinos. Yeah, we had NDAs, we have contracts, we have all the legal people look at things, and it was not super easy to get our Wiener Stadtwerke legal department happy, but we managed. And also maybe it's interesting to note that IEEE was super flexible in terms of where do we exchange or how do we exchange data. So basically what we ended up doing is that we as Wiener Stadtwerke provided information sharing platforms and gave access to IEEE or to the expert panel. So the data was really on our systems rather than we sent them somewhere and we don't really know where they are. And lastly, I think it was mentioned by Clara already, or by Konstantinos, that the end goal of IEEE, as I understood it, is not to act as a certification authority itself so much, but more in defining the standards. And then actual certification authorities that companies interact with could well be local ones or like regional ones. So there could be European institutions offering certification following the IEEE standard, and nothing ever has to leave the continent if that's really what you really care most about.
Thank you, Dietmar. I forgot this. This is not our role to do the assessment. That means we did it for the city of Vienna, but this is not our role. Our role is to develop the specifications. The assessment can be done by whomever you trust. If they are trained, we are going to train these assessors, but it's not our role.
And the certificate is valid for how many years?
Yes, it is. It is basically the certification is on the system as it was at that time. And you're right. I mean, Dietmar can say in this case, in the city of Vienna case, the system was frozen, so it was not learning again. But if you are retraining the system, maybe a recertification will be needed.
So a recheck, not a full certification, but from time to time a check, is it still doing what it is supposed to do?
This is a general question. It is also in the AI Act.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I think that we are already over time and people are hungry, but I would like to end up with a round, which is important to Hannes, namely the concrete points for the roadmap for digital humanists. Specifically, what do you consider as being important to implement digital humanists in practice? So whoever would like to start.
Each one.
Yes, just one.
Democratize the access to data and the discussion, because we need more people involved in this to really get the tools to make it possible.
Democratization of data and the discussion. So Dietmar, for you as well.
Yeah, I would say push further the awareness for the challenges and the topics, because that is in my eyes really key. And this is something that happened quite strongly, I feel, with the GDPR for the data protection problems, that the Commission made this rather bold move in putting out this very strong threat and everybody was super hectic for a while. All the companies in Europe, oh no, now we have all these regulations. And the general public really picked up, okay, this is something that is really there and that is worth considering. For autonomous decision-making systems or AI, it's not so much the case maybe now, but that's something that we should push forward. And I would say, as somebody also earlier said, it's not just about AI ethics, what we're talking about here. It's really about ethical questions in the digital context overall. And that's something that just needs to be constantly pushed against, that more people see that there are serious problems for society and everyone.
Thank you, Dietmar. Anja, Konstantinos?
So I would like really to underline what Helga Novotny said, that we should really study the anthropological behavior of the people who create these systems, because there is a big potential there that we're not using. And we need to study this and to see how we can make use of the freedom that they have in order to get better systems and have less problems. So look at this anthropological layer of the system developers.
Thank you. Anja.
Great segue. I will say something different than what I thought I'd say, building on that. So I spoke about the importance of demystifying, getting out of the ivory tower on this technology. So my point for the map is to address the social silences. So Pierre Bourdieu, the French philosopher, spoke in his 60s literature about social silences. What are we not discussing? And we are so, our society is just filled with disinformation and just this information in general, that we're not really listening to what is not being discussed. So it builds on Konstantinos's point, to understand the anthropology of those building systems, but also what are the issues that we are not discussing or maybe not listening to in the best possible way.
Thank you very much. I hope that this was useful for the roadmap. I thank you very much for the discussions and also for the questions. And looking forward to further collaboration, as I said, on this digital humanist common path. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Clara, can you give a photograph?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.